While I was wiping the blood and grease off my knuckles in my workshop, trying to find a way to save my son-in-law's failing business, my own daughter was in a lawyer's office, signing papers to have me declared mentally incompetent. Samantha wanted my millions, and she wanted them before I rotted away in my own filth, as she put it. She thought I was just a tired old man, a relic of the past who didn't understand the modern world of high finance and elite social circles. She forgot one crucial thing. I've owned a waste management and industrial welding company for 40 years. I know exactly how to handle trash, and I'm about to show her that I'm not going anywhere near a padded cell. My name is Arthur. I'm 60 years old, and my hands are permanently stained with the honest work that built a secret empire. I don't wear Rolexes or drive Italian sports cars. I wear steel-toed boots and drive a beat-up Dodge Ram that's seen more miles than Samantha has seen days of her privileged life. I raised her alone after her mother passed, giving her everything she ever asked for. I thought I was raising a queen, but it turns out I was just funding the lifestyle of a snake who eventually found a nest among the city's self-proclaimed aristocracy. Before we get deeper into how I found out about her ultimate betrayal, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot of stories to tell about people who thought they could outsmart a man who grew up with nothing, and you won't want to miss how this one ends. The day of the wedding was the first real warning sign. Samantha married Blake, a guy whose family owns art galleries and talks about lineage like they're European royalty. When it came time for the ceremony, Samantha didn't want me walking her down the aisle. She told me the smell of diesel and metal, quote, 3, and would ruin her designer dress. She made me sit in the back row, and during the reception, she introduced me to Blake's parents as, quote, 4, who looked after her childhood home. I stayed quiet because I wanted her to be happy. I thought it was just a phase, a side effect of trying to fit into a world of silver spoons and hollow smiles. I was wrong. It wasn't a phase. It was the beginning of a cold, calculated plan to erase the man who paid for every bit of the life she now used to look down on me. I watched from the shadows of that ballroom as she toasted to a future that, in her mind, didn't include a quote 5 like her father. 6 months after the wedding, Samantha only showed up at my garage when her credit cards hit their limit, or her luxury SUV needed a full tank of gas on my tab. She would stand in the middle of my workshop, hovering over the oil-stained concrete in $500 heels, looking at my life with a disgusted curl in her lip. She didn't come to ask how I was doing, or if my old back injury was acting up. She came to demand. "Dad, Blake's family is hosting a gala for the National Arts Endowment," she said one Tuesday, waving a hand to clear the smell of burning solder from her face. "I need $50,000. Blake's investment portfolio is transitioning. We can't look like we're struggling. It would be social suicide." I looked at her, my hands covered in charcoal dust from a repair job. I told her that $50,000 was the yearly salary of 2 of my best welders. She didn't even blink. She told me that my quote 8 generated plenty of cash, and that I should be grateful she was even giving me the chance to support a quote 9 cause. She didn't see the business that put her through private school. She saw a dirty ATM that smelled like a junkyard. The disrespect wasn't just about the money. It was the way she spoke to my staff. One afternoon, she screamed at my floor manager, Mike, a man who has been with me for 30 years, because he parked a forklift too close to her white Range Rover. She called him a quote 10 and told him to remember his place. When I stepped in to defend him, she turned that venom on me. Quote 11, she hissed. She left with a check, but the look of pure disdain in her eyes stayed with me. She wasn't just drifting away. She was actively trying to bury her roots while keeping her hand in my pocket. A few weeks later, Samantha accidentally left her tablet at my workshop after another one of her emergency visits to ask for money. I knew she had a high-stakes presentation with her mother-in-law, Eleanor, later that day. Thinking I was being a good father, I washed the grease off my arms, put on a clean shirt, and drove over to the Blake family estate. The mansion looked like something out of a movie: white pillars, perfectly manicured lawns, and a gate that looked like it cost more than my first house. When I pulled my truck into the circular driveway, the security guard looked at me like I was a stray dog. I told him I was Samantha's father. He hesitated, but let me through. As I walked toward the massive front doors, I saw Samantha standing on the porch with Eleanor. They were both dressed in silk and pearls, sipping tea. When Samantha saw me, her face didn't light up with gratitude. Instead, it turned a ghostly shade of pale. She practically sprinted down the steps, intercepting me before I could reach the porch. She hissed, her voice trembling with rage. I replied, holding it out. Just then, Eleanor walked over, her eyes scanning my worn-out boots and the faded logo on my shirt. She asked with a polished, icy tone. Samantha didn't hesitate. She didn't even look me in the eye. She snatched the tablet from my hand and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and shoved it into my chest. Eleanor laughed softly, a sound like glass breaking. She remarked as they turned their backs on me. I stood there, holding that $20 bill, feeling the cold weight of her betrayal sink into my bones. The quote 20 incident changed something inside me. I realized I wasn't a father to her anymore. I was a secret she wanted to keep buried. But reality has a way of digging things up. A month later, Samantha showed up at my workshop at 7 p.m. She didn't look like an aristocrat anymore. Her mascara was smudged, and her hands were shaking. She didn't offer a greeting. She walked straight into my office and shut the door. "I need $300,000, Dad, now, by Friday," she said, her voice cracking. I sat back in my chair, the springs creaking under my weight. I asked her what happened to Blake's transitioning portfolio. She broke down, explaining that Blake had made a series of reckless bets with company funds, and a major investor was threatening to go to the authorities if the hole wasn't filled immediately. She pleaded, leaning over my desk. I looked at her, waiting for the way she had treated me at the mansion. It never came. Instead, she added a condition that felt like a slap in the face. She was asking me to save her life while still calling my life's work. I told her I'd think about it. She left a folder of their debt details on my desk, oblivious to the fact that I was finally starting to see the true face of the daughter I had raised. After Samantha left my office, I felt a heavy silence settle over the workshop. She had left her designer handbag sitting on the corner of my desk in her rush to leave. I reached out to move it, and it tipped over, spilling its contents. Amidst the expensive lipsticks and silk scarves, a thick manila envelope slid out. It wasn't about Blake's debts. I opened it, expecting more financial records. Instead, I found a legal petition titled Petition for Involuntary Guardianship and Mental Competency Evaluation. My heart stopped. I sat there in the dim light of my office, reading words that felt like poisoned needles. Samantha had already filled out the paperwork. She was claiming that I was confused, incapable of managing my own affairs, and living in hazardous, unsanitary conditions. She was trying to have me declared mentally unfit. Her plan was clear. She didn't just want the $300,000, she wanted the whole kingdom. If she could prove I was losing my mind, she would gain full control over my bank accounts, my property, and my company. She wanted to lock me away in a high-end, quote, 32, quote, where I wouldn't embarrass her anymore, all while she spent the money I had bled for. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I had spent my life building a safety net for her, and she was turning it into a noose for me. She was waiting for me to sign over the investment money, just to tide them over until the court date, where she would finish me off for good. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just carefully tucked the papers back into her bag and sat there, staring at the welding sparks flying in the shop outside my window. For 40 years, I had been a builder. But that night, as I looked at the evidence of my daughter's betrayal, I decided it was time to become a demolition expert. The next morning, I didn't call Samantha. Instead, I called Frank, a man who had been my lawyer and my friend since we were both eating cold sandwiches on construction sites. I met him in his small, unassuming office downtown. I laid the guardianship papers on his desk and told him everything: the service entrance, the quote 35 insult, and the $300,000 she wanted to quote 36 save her husband's skin. Frank looked through the papers, his jaw tightening. I nodded, feeling a strange, icy calm. I told Frank I didn't want to sue her. I didn't want to argue in a courtroom where she could play the victim. I wanted to use the one thing they thought I was too, quote, 38, quote, to understand: the market. I said. Frank smiled for the first time in an hour. He understood. Over the next few days, we moved like ghosts. It turned out the Blakes were living on a house of cards. Their, quote, 41 lifestyle was funded by massive loans secured against their galleries and their mansion. They were months behind on their mortgage, and the bank was quietly looking for a buyer to take the debt off their hands. By Thursday afternoon, I wasn't just a trash guy anymore. Through my holding company, I had become the primary creditor for Blake's business and the secret owner of the mortgage on the very mansion where I had been told to use the service entrance. I owned the roof over their heads, and they didn't have the slightest clue. On Friday morning, Samantha returned to my workshop. She was trying to act composed, but I could see the predatory glint in her eyes. She thought she was about to secure the first part of her inheritance. I sat behind my desk, the heavy manila envelope with the guardianship papers hidden in a drawer, and a new contract sitting on the table between us. I said, my voice steady. She let out a breath of relief that sounded more like a hiss. She barely glanced at the pages. Her eyes were already on the check I had placed near the corner of the desk. She said with a patronizing smile. She thought I was playing dress-up, pretending to be a big-shot financier in my greasy office. She didn't bother to read the fine print. If she had, she would have seen the cross-collateralization clause. It stated that this loan was backed not just by Blake's failing business, but by all personal assets and real estate held by the family, assets that my holding company now conveniently controlled the debt for. Most importantly, it had a zero grace period clause. If the payment wasn't made by the stroke of midnight on the due date, ownership of all secured assets would immediately transfer to the lender to settle the debt. She signed her name with a flourish, her expensive pen scratching against the paper. Quote 48, she said, snatching up the check. She didn't even give me a hug. She just walked out, laughing into her phone as she told Blake the trash money was in the bank. As her Range Rover pulled away, kicking up dust, I looked at the signature. She had just signed away her husband's legacy and her own future, thinking she was the one pulling the strings. The 3 weeks leading up to the deadline were the quietest of my life. Samantha didn't call once to check on me. She didn't send a text to ask if I was still confused or if I needed help with my chores. Through the grapevine of the city's high-end service industry, the caterers, the valet drivers, the people she considered invisible, I heard everything. The Blakes were throwing a massive victory gala. They were telling their friends that a private European equity group had recognized Blake's genius and invested heavily in their future. They weren't using my money to pay off the debts. They were using it to throw a party to pretend the debts didn't exist. Eleanor was supposedly bragging about a new addition to their art gallery, while Blake was seen test-driving a car he couldn't afford. They thought they had outsmarted the, quote, 53, quote. They thought the $300,000 was just a gift from a senile old fool who didn't know how to read a balance sheet. On the night before the deadline, I sat in my workshop until midnight. I watched the clock tick over. The contract was clear. The full repayment was due. My bank account remained empty. No wire transfer arrived. No phone call came to ask for an extension. They were too busy drinking champagne and laughing at the handyman to realize the clock had run out. I called Frank. "It's done," I said. "The grace period is over. Trigger the clauses. I want the deed to the estate, the gallery titles, and the business assets transferred to the holding company by morning." Frank confirmed that the legal machinery was already in motion. Samantha had handed me the keys to her world, believing she was locking me in a cage. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I had spent 60 years building things up, but tomorrow, for the first time in my life, I was going to enjoy watching something fall apart. The night of the gala, the Blake mansion was glowing. Music spilled out onto the lawn, and the driveway was packed with luxury cars. I didn't arrive in a tuxedo. I arrived in my work truck, wearing my grease-stained overalls. I walked straight to the front door, not the service entrance. When the security guard tried to stop me, I handed him a copy of the deed and the court-certified transfer of ownership. He stepped aside, his eyes wide. I walked into the ballroom, the music screeching to a halt as the refined guests stared at the man who looked like he'd just crawled out of a sewer. Samantha ran over, her face twisted in embarrassment. "What are you doing? Get out of here before you ruin everything," she screamed. Blake and Eleanor followed, their faces full of disdain. "Security, remove this person," Eleanor commanded. I didn't budge. I pulled the microphone from the hands of the stunned MC, I said, my voice booming through the hall. I looked at Samantha, who was trembling. The room went silent. There was watching as their golden couple was stripped bare by a man with dirt under his nails. After the gala, the silence was the most rewarding part. The Blakes tried to sue, of course. They hired expensive lawyers to argue that I had, quote, 60 for them. But Frank was 3 steps ahead. Every document had Samantha's signature on it. The court saw a legitimate business transaction that they had simply failed to honor. Within a month, they were out. I didn't keep the mansion. I didn't need 20 bedrooms and a marble staircase. I sold the estate and the galleries for a massive profit, and used the money to build a state-of-the-art vocational school for young men and women who want to learn trade skills, welding, mechanics, and waste management. I want them to know that there is dignity in dirty hands, and that you can build a kingdom without ever wearing a suit. As for Samantha, I gave her one final choice. I didn't leave her on the street, but I didn't give her a handout either. I offered her an entry-level job at my processing plant, sorting recyclables for minimum wage. She lasted 2 days before quitting in a fit of rage. I haven't heard from her since, and for the first time in years, my blood pressure is down and my heart is light. I'm 60 years old, I'm growing my business, and I finally have friends who like me for the grease under my fingernails, not the numbers in my bank account. I've realized that you can't choose your family, but you can certainly choose who gets to stay in your life. Looking back at everything, I have to ask, do you think I was too cold? Or did I do exactly what a father should do to teach a final, hard lesson? What would you have done if your own child tried to lock you away for your money? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of justice and revenge, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our upcoming stories. Your support helps us bring more of these incredible journeys to life. The end. Thank you for listening.